So Nick, what up? What's going on?
Big chillin', man. How are you?
Chilling. How are you dealing with this Florida humid weather? I see you are having a
I
hat, nice
I love it.
beanie.
Yeah, I thrive. I think my favorite weather is 90 degrees, 90% humidity. I like when you walk outside and it's just immediately you're wet. You
Really?
can feel, yeah.
What do you like about that?
I don't know. The moisture's nice. I think maybe it's not just the humidity, because I've lived in other humid places too. In the middle of Georgia, I've lived in North Carolina, on the coast and off the coast. And that 90% humidity doesn't feel as good when you're off the coast. I think maybe it's a combination.
Damn.
Being on the coast with the coastal breeze,
Yes.
the saltwater
Yes,
smell,
I
even when
agree.
you're like 10 miles in and you can still kind of
I
smell it.
agree. Because
Mm,
humid European cities in the middle of summer doesn't feel anything like this Venice humid
yeah.
weather at all. So how long you've been here in the
Uh,
Venice area?
I moved here as a kid. Family moved when I was 9, but we grew up in Baltimore, in the
Mhm.
greater Baltimore area. And so I lived here from when I was 9, went to school here, middle school, high school, for a few more years. And then 2015 was the Marine Corps
Mm-hmm.
until 2019. And I was a variety of places there.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, it was California, Georgia, and back here
California. Where in California?
in Los Angeles, in Burbank.
In Burbank. That's why you are the only one person that I met here that has California area code. Because when you gave
Yeah.
me your phone number and you started 818, I'm like, what? And that's Burbank. So tell me about Baltimore.
Baltimore is interesting. I was pretty young when I was living there. Um, it's not a place I'd recommend
Why?
people to move to live.
Why?
It's just not that nice.
Mm-hmm.
There's nice areas. The harbor area is okay as a kid. You can see the boats and there's Camden Yards, but there's a lot of crime. Everything's kind of nasty. The people weren't very nice either. That's something that I still remember
Mm-hmm.
for some reason.
I guess if you live in crappy neighborhood, you have no reason to be nice, right?
Yeah, I guess. And I mean, also it's pretty segregated, the neighborhoods.
Uh-huh.
So
What
if
are
you're
the
out of place,
Uh-huh.
you're going to get noticed immediately.
So if you are like out of the group that doesn't create its own neighborhood, you are someone that's gonna be like
Yeah,
a
they're just
target
like,
or
why are
something.
you here?
Yeah.
You know,
Okay.
I mean, you might not get mugged, but you
What
probably will
what
get
are the
mugged.
main ethnicities out there? Is it more
Uh,
like a Hispanic related or African
no,
American or what?
there's a lot of African Americans out there, and there's just a lot of white people too, from what I
Mm-hmm.
remember.
Mm-hmm.
But they've been clashing for years
Mm-hmm.
over there, and I don't think anyone ever really got like a leg up on it to control it, and it's sort of just metastasized. And it seems from the people that I talked to that, because I had some friends that also lived there for longer after I had left, and people that I met in the military that were from there and grew up their whole life there, and they were like, yeah, it's just gotten worse.
How would you compare Baltimore neighborhoods and Los Angeles neighborhoods? Smaller?
Uh, they're smaller. LA neighborhoods are pretty sprawling.
Mhm.
In LA, it's weird. So I lived in Burbank, which is probably the nicest area of LA that I visited,
Mm-hmm.
because I visited a lot of areas, lived there. But even that, it was still pretty big. You know, it's like the size of Venice
Mm-hmm.
almost,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
or maybe even a little bit
I
bigger.
would say it's bigger.
And the neighborhoods are all around. So Burbank's up by the north. You have the hills above,
Mm-hmm.
and you have kind of the downtown and Disney and
All that crazy madness.
yeah, whatever is happening downtown in LA, and you have the hypodermic needle streets and everything right there. But
How's
in
it?
certain areas in Burbank, it's glorious. Like you walk
Oh
around,
yeah.
you're like, oh,
Oh
this
yeah.
is lovely. But
Yeah.
you know, a
Bur-
10-minute bike ride, and you're
Yeah,
not in a happy place
you,
at all.
You are in freaking hell, man. Burbank is like so different than anything because it's really like family oriented, residential oriented, and there is a downtown, and it's even the downtown is super nice, and it's because Burbank is not part of LA, and that's why they have different laws, regulations, and stuff like that. But the rest
Yeah.
of that is pretty crap. How would you compare that? Let's say downtown Los Angeles and like some certain areas in like Baltimore or like other cities in the United States where you used to live.
LA is one of the worst overall.
Is it worse than Baltimore?
It's hard for me to say because I haven't been there as an adult,
Okay.
but it could be. I mean, in terms of how it felt, and maybe that was just a symptom of the time I was there,
Mm-hmm.
but it certainly hasn't gotten any better.
Mm-hmm.
And from what I remember in Baltimore of, trying to skateboard to places and people stealing your shoes, LA, it wasn't that, but it seemed like most of the neighborhoods I went to looked like a third world country. Like rundown buildings, people everywhere, no one really doing anything. Nobody cared about you. That was like a similar thing.
Yes.
Although it was probably worse in LA than it was in Baltimore. Because there's this weird kind of Maryland sort of culture.
Mm-hmm.
They got like their own accent in Baltimore too.
Really?
So there's a little bit of camaraderie there amongst people in Maryland and in Baltimore. But in LA, there was zero.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, if people lived there at all their whole life, you really wouldn't be able to tell.
Mm-hmm.
They were never going to stop to talk to you unless you were directly in their way. Everyone had their own agenda about what, it wasn't like here,
Mm-hmm.
where something happens on the street and you have people helping out. That would never, ever happen in LA. Even in Burbank, That would never happen. If someone just passed out in the middle of the road, the cops might show up eventually, but
it's very
nobody
random.
was going to help.
Yes, that's
So
very
there's no
random.
community. It's kind of...
I think it's because of the big cities. More people living in the same, like, let's say, neighborhood, but if the neighborhood is large enough that the people are distant enough to not know even each other's name. Many times I lived and I didn't even know my neighbor's name for years. And I was meeting that dude at like every day, whatever, but I never had a reason to really ask him like, hey, what are you up to? What's your name? Whatever, right? Because there's nothing that you share, no similarities whatsoever. So I think it's like a thing of big cities. People just don't care. They don't care about each other at all. Here, man, like my friend's wife, her car just broke down the street. 5 guys stopped in like 30 minutes to help her out before we got there. I just couldn't believe when she told me. She was surprised by herself as well. But I mean, she's here for a while, so she kind of know what's going on. But to me, as someone who came fresh from LA, that was surprising. So Baltimore, childhood in Baltimore can be rough.
Yeah, it can be. And it can be nice on the outskirts too.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of big American cities, you have whatever craziness is going on in the city, it's reached a critical mass of that people don't care.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the suburbs, which are nice in an isolated situation in terms of like if you wanted to raise a family, but it's not going to help the problem because all the people that maybe care don't want to live there.
Exactly.
So they just live outside, they drive in, they do their business, and they leave.
And the central area is just getting worse and worse because no one wants to live there and make a business. What's the, let's say, the cops situation out there? Do you have like any information? Because I mean, in LA, it's pretty bad because they don't have they have literally no rights or to do something. So they gave up on a lot of things like prostitutions and stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the same as it was in LA because their hands are pretty tied in LA, which is probably part of the problem. In Baltimore, I'm just not sure because, I mean, I think they tried to fight the gangs, but the gangs control a lot of territory. At least they did. And I don't know if that also reached a critical mass where it reached a certain point where like the county and like the governors and everybody in charge of the city was like, all right, we're just going to have to not focus on that anymore and basically create a perimeter around it and say, don't bother going here. Kind of like the no-go zones in London or that other cities have this, but
man, that's like very common in every Western capital or
DC had it too
at these big cities. Oh yeah,
because we would visit, they have a metro, which that was a pretty cool part about Baltimore and that greater area is they had a metro, so like underground, like a subway, but it was a straight shot from Baltimore to DC. So you could take the metro and just end up in DC. And that was cool, but DC also didn't really look much better. And that's supposed to be like the capital of the United States.
My friend actually surprised me with information. He was there like about, I would say 8 months ago or something like that. And he said like very close from like a White House, he just saw a bunch of tents and like things that he actually sees in LA on daily basis. And I just couldn't believe that because, it's a capital, right? But then, like what is actually the purpose of the capital, who is running the capital, and I'm not even surprised of that, because then you see the same policies out there and out in LA and in other cities, and people are running out of those cities like to places like Venice or Sarasota.
Florida's exploding.
Every time I'm talking to some locals who were born here, they are like just praying, please God, don't bring this crap here,
Yeah, it's insane. I mean, all we can do is hope at this point. there's good things about a lot of people moving to Florida for like people who already own homes or whatever, raising all the value of the land. But I mean, when I grew up here, Border Road, I don't know how familiar you are with closer to the interstate, but you go down Venice off of the island. There was a road called Border Road that went east, and pretty much right after the interstate, it was a dirt road when I was growing up. Now there's full scale
freeway.
Yeah, like golf and country clubs already built, ready to rock. Like it's insane how fast it happened. And I wasn't here for all of it, so maybe that the shock value of coming back.
You definitely can see the change, right? I even see it. I'm here for 7 months or something like that, and I can see a big difference, especially like construction, like malls, houses, like those closed communities and stuff like that. So like childhood in Baltimore is rough, but do you think like your experience like moving city to city somehow like changed direction of your life as well, meaning like that there were some let's say incidents that led you to the point that you said, okay, I'm gonna join like Marine Corps or something like that, or that wasn't the reason?
Maybe it could have been. I don't know if I would directly attribute any one incident to me wanting to do that, or anything that I can remember like being a trigger in my subconscious to lead me towards it. But it does make you a little bit more independent when you have to shift as a child. I think that probably does for like every kid, no matter where you're from. If you don't grow up in one spot with one community, you're going to have to make new relationships all the time. And so it makes you more self-reliant a little bit. But in terms of why I enlisted, I don't know. I think I just wanted to see what that was all about. Curiosity.
Oh, so you wanted that experience. Interesting.
Because when you grow up in such an insular country like the United States, where everything is a bubble, like nothing really exists. For the sake of the argument, nothing exists outside of the United States when you're growing up in the 90s in the United States, because I was born in 1990. So peak of the U.S. power, peak of U.S. confidence globally, nationally in the country. Everything's booming, the economy's booming, whatever, military successes. And you're not really given the full story. You're given the American story when you're grown up of what the world is about. And so you get an opportunity, hey, we'll pay you to go write a part of this story. You're not really thinking about all the things you may or may not have to do, but you're like, let me go on this adventure. And that's what I wanted to do. I was like, get me out of here. Let's just go see what it's all about.
How do you start this process? Do you go to some like recruitment center or something like that?
Yeah. So they have each branch of the military has a recruitment center. For me, it was up in Sarasota. They just have this little office, kind of in like a similar place to where we are now. Just
is
on the
that
side
actually
of the
on the 41 on the left? I think I drove by
where there's a Starbucks.
Yeah, you are driving north, and I see.
So there is that one, but the one I ended up going to more because I visited that one once for like a fitness, because they do a little bit of fitness to make sure you're not going to be a complete like piece of shit when you show up.
Yeah.
But the main one was actually further north.
Okay.
I don't remember the reason why I ended up. I think this is because I was working in that area, and when I got tired of working, that was the closest one. I was like, let me just go talk to these guys, and it's surprisingly easy. Like you walk in. You need to have a GED or a high school diploma, right? They ask you what you want to do. A lot of that is not relevant. They're going to give you whatever job they want to give you, and they got to meet quotas too. But yeah, it's not long. If you tell them you want to go now, they'll send you now, like as in a few weeks.
Like to Marine Corps.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming to the Army, that's even easier.
Yeah, the Army's real easy. They're like begging. Because I did a little dabbling with the Army too, because I had a buddy that was in the Army, and he had gone a few years before me. I went to high school with him. And so I was like, okay, well, I know that avenue's open, and I know they're trotting around the globe, so I could get into the mix a little bit. And I had gone in and talked with them about stuff and left, and the recruiter called me all the time. Like, hey, what's up? What are your plans? You ready to take the next step? And I was already talking to the Marine Corps recruiters, and I don't know, maybe like the ego in me, I was like, nah, I just want to do the Marine Corps. It's
you told him?
I didn't tell him that. I just ghosted him. But
is there a certain rivalry between them? Like, yeah, it must be, right?
Yeah, there is. It's generally friendly, though. Okay. It's not like blows will get thrown, but like fights in the military are pretty common, and it's not We're not actually trying to kill each other.
I mean,
I think on a deep level, we realize we're on the same team.
Yeah, you guys have to work together, right?
Yeah, there's a huge rivalry.
Yeah.
When it comes to working together, it usually works really well. What you'll get is like chirping, like at a hockey game or a sports game, there's constant chirping. So if we're working with Air Force or Army guys to do helicopters or logistics or something, yeah, we're constantly making fun of each other. But
as a guy,
kind of the way it was.
Yeah, that's like a natural way how to
it's
how
very,
to do something.
very natural, especially for guys, at least.
So, when you decided you're gonna join Marine Corps, like how difficult was the training? And if you can actually explain to people who don't understand the difference between Army and Marine, can you maybe make some classification?
Yeah, the Marine Corps is a little bit weird, and that technically it's part of the Navy. That's what you have to lead with. Marines will probably want to kill me online for saying this, but it is part of the Navy. It's its own little group that it's tiny, I guess is the best way to start by describing it. Maybe, I think when I was in, we had like 180,000 active duty Marines, and the Army is millions. So it's tiny on a scale that's kind of hard to comprehend. It's also kind of hard to comprehend how big the Army really is.
Yeah.
The Army does everything in the U.S. military's playbook on land, and they do a lot of air too, so that's helicopters. The Marine Corps does a little bit of everything. They're a combined force. They have guys on the ground, they have guys out at sea, they have guys in the air, so they have pilots, helicopters, everything. And they're sort of self-contained. At least for a very long time, they were almost exclusively self-contained. And what I mean by that is they would get orders from the big commanders in Washington, and they would go do their own thing entirely. Maybe with some support from the Navy, from the ships, especially back in the earlier days and in the World Wars. But for the most part, they're doing their own thing. And the Marine Corps historically always prided itself on having these elite riflemen, right? Like guys that could really be skilled with a rifle. So that's kind of where the ethos comes from in the training. And they still try to hammer it in. Like every Marine is a rifleman. So there's a lot of... The training's going to be more intense a little bit than your Army basic training. It's longer. It's 13 weeks. Whereas the Army... I actually don't know how long the Army's is, but it's not 13 weeks.
When I was watching interviews from World War I and World War II, the Germans always said that the Americans were the best shooters because they shoot since they were little kids. Do you think it's actually like true that it actually applies even to like until like right now?
That applies, I think, not just to Americans. I think that applies to anyone who grows up and can handle a rifle.
Yeah,
is going to be more naturally inclined. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to be a good shooter if you're growing up shooting as a kid. We actually encounter that problem a lot in the Marine Corps, even as early as basic training. But you have guys that have developed habits with marksmanship. And they're harder to break once you develop them. Whereas if you take a guy that has never shot a rifle in his life and he gets instruction, good instruction, that person will be very good with a rifle.
So is that actually better to not be able to do anything?
I don't know if it's better. I think if you grew up shooting and you had good instruction, you're going to be ahead of the curve.
Okay.
But if you had bad instruction, you're going to be behind the curve. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it depends who was your dad, pretty much.
Yeah, but experience with like firearms in general is going to be good for anyone in the military.
You're not going to be at least afraid of them.
It's just not a clean slate. And that's why you see even like with countries that don't have as much of a formalized military, but they have been fighting, they tend to already be pretty good. Even if it's not a country, like somebody like the Taliban. Those kids grow up fighting. They're good shots.
That's all they know.
They're not just these mysterious sand people that are spraying into the air that they would have you believe. Like they know what they're doing. They've been doing it for decades.
We're gonna get into that because that's so fascinating to me. Experience just to talk to someone who actually were to those places, because to me this is, as we talked before, like this is completely different world. You sometimes would probably feel like you are in different century because you see like how people live and what are their priorities, what's their like, what are their, let's say, life goals. You will feel like that they listen completely different radio than you do. It's just like it's just nuts. So I'm really glad you came by, because this is very unique opportunity for me. I talk to people even on the podcast who were in Iraq, but not in combat. They were more in like a leadership like positions, like colonel and stuff like that. So they don't really see the real combat on daily basis, you know, probably like you did on some of those patrols, you know. So let's go back to the training. Like, what do you have to do, like a typical Marine training? How long it takes, and do you think it's actually like a hard to pass it, or?
I don't think it's physically hard to pass it.
Oh, okay.
I think they have a sort of, once you commit to joining the Marine Corps, they have something called the Poolee program, which is you said, I'm going to go do this, and they've given you a date for basic training, but you're not in yet, right? But you've signed papers.
Okay.
So the recruitment guys do a good job at taking the really raw, like, recruit and actually getting them to do pull-ups and run and not be a bitch. At least they do the best job they can, right? So by the time you actually show up to basic, the physical trials that you have to beat, they're all very beatable. And I think they're very beatable for anyone who's really in good shape.
Okay.
It's more of
don't quit.
A mental thing.
Yeah, don't quit, right?
Don't quit. Yeah, and there's really not a high attrition rate either. Like, by the time people make it to Marine Corps basic training, we want them to become Marines. So there's not a whole lot of people like failing out. It's not like a special operations
like
selection
Navy SEALs
or
or something like that.
No, it's not like that. You want them to succeed, and so yeah, some of them might get a lot of extra attention during training, but
what does it mean, extra attention?
It means you get hazed a little bit extra. Hazed is maybe the wrong word. Maybe I don't know if that's too sensitive for the Marine Corps now. I don't know.
Oh yeah.
But they get trained harder.
Everything
is
sensitive
weak.
now.
Yeah, if you're going to be weak and hold the platoon back.
Oh yeah.
The DIs are going to notice, and they're going to
that's bad.
Single you out.
That's bad.
Or what is usually more an effective punishment after that is they'll just make everybody pay for one guy, and they'll make sure that everybody knows that the one guy is the reason. Right? Like, this guy was slow on the run, so you are all going to carry extra weight now, or you're all going to do extra push-ups now, whatever you want to make it.
Damn.
But it's mainly just a mental thing. But it's a lot of breaking down early on. You know, the classic thing that everyone might see in the videos of getting yelled at and telling you you're worthless. But they're really just breaking down the barriers so they can teach you how to be a new
I think
person.
they just recently like changed the policy that you cannot yell to soldiers. I don't think that it's a Marine, but I think it's an Army thing. But I've been told that this is a thing.
We also heard, I don't even know if it's true, but things that we heard, and I don't know if this is just us like bashing on the Army again back when I was in, but we heard that they had started giving out these cards at the Army basic training, and it was like a little card you could hold up that was saying, I'm too stressed out, you can't yell at me for now. So it's like your little timeout card.
What?
That just seems like a joke to me. Like, if you're going to send guys to go get like shot at and blown up at, like,
see, and that's
you can't handle getting yelled at, bro. I'm sorry. Like,
that's exactly gonna produce that guy who is, let's say, holding the entire platoon back, and you are gonna send him there with all those guys, and they're all gonna get maybe killed or injured or just have some certain bad experience because of this weak point, you know, in their chain link. That is crazy. How long this period take? Let's say this training.
It's 13 weeks in the Marine Corps for basic, and then depending on your job, you'll do follow-up training for more oriented towards combat. So it'll teach you how to use heavier weapon systems. For almost everybody, you'll go to a combat school that isn't focused on the infantry because you don't have an infantry MOS. Like me, I was a communications guy. In 0650 when at first, the MOS changed later down the road, but you get sent to just a combat training. They'll teach you how to use machine guns, squad tactics, land navigation, all these essential things. And then from there, you have to go learn how to actually do your job. So for us, that was basically a year of communications training. And I was a data guy, so that's kind of like modern IT, or at least similar. So routing, switching, I think about like big computer networks that you put together.
How would you compare what you learn actually in the Marine Corps as a Marine compared to what you could possibly learn as a civilian, or like on being a civilian? Like, can you learn the same things?
Talking about like the technical side?
Yes.
Yeah, you learn very similar things. So for my job, as an 0651 when I was in training, we're basically following what they would call the CompTIA standard, which is an industry standard in IT.
Mm-hmm.
So in the civilian world, you can go get certifications that are going to cover largely the same thing. Now, we did have extra things involved because we're working with bespoke hardware that the Marine Corps uses.
Mm-hmm.
So the hands-on stuff is going to be a little different. But at the end of the day, it's still a router. It's still a switch.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
It's still a SATCOM downlink terminal. All that stuff
Mm-hmm.
under the hood is the same.
Mm-hmm.
So it is very similar.
Mm-hmm.
It's using it in the tactical environment, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that is really where
I have
it's
a video I want to play you because the thing is, everything, as you said, everything is changing, and some certain things are just driving me nuts, because what do you think about this?
There's a reason why 26 of the most physically fit women in the Marine Corps have failed out of this course. That reason is simple. When you put 120 pounds on the back of a woman, she crumbles like a fucking crouton.
What do you think about that?
Yeah.
Is that actually a thing nowadays, that everything has to be like, oh, you need to have certain amount of women in the platoon, certain amount of this and that, and instead of just having a qualified people for the job?
I would always prefer that we just had a qualified person.
Yeah.
I never give a fuck.
Yeah, right.
But these kind of things were getting pushed down from the top.
But why?
And it's not for performance.
Yeah.
Which is the first bad sign, right? When you have a military and we pay ungodly amounts of tax money to have it be as good as possible, the only thing you want from it is results,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's the only thing anyone should care about.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, that's not really the reality with the way the money gets thrown around up in Washington. So visually, it needs to tick boxes too. And when people start chirping and complaining that it's not diverse enough, or they're not including people, or people aren't getting opportunities, that's when these things start to come down, and they're dangerous.
Yeah.
Like, I think if you have a program that's designed to build up, so that was probably, they're talking about a selection program,
Mm-hmm.
maybe for MARSOC or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
All you want is have the most capable people.
Yeah.
Now, if that doesn't include women for another reason,
Mm-hmm.
that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the reality was, when we were working there, I think we had one attempt to go to assessment and selection. I don't think she made it. But I think the reality was still there that it was weird,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it's all men all the time.
Exactly,
and
right.
And the assessment and selection isn't even about carrying a 120-pound pack. That's really not what it's about. You can teach anybody how to do that. You can put them in the gym long enough and have them do that. It's a personality test.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be kind of independent. You need to be a critical thinker. You need to be a problem solver. You need to not panic in weird situations.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a lot of really complex ways of how they assess personalities. And if you just throw a wrench into the system, like saying, hey, we're required to have women come to this now, well, that's going to make people super, super weird all of a sudden, because they're going to be like, all right, what am I actually being assessed on?
Yes.
Why is this person here?
Yeah.
And I think it's bad in general.
Yeah.
For the military.
It's
like,
bad.
the military should be exempt from all the wokeness.
Yes.
And like that stuff needs to stay away.
Man, everything.
Because it's not going to matter if the military doesn't do its job. You can have the wokest military in the world. The second you need it, if it fails because it was too woke and you didn't focus on performance metrics, what good was it?
Yeah, yeah. But man, that's not even like a military. That's everywhere. People should be on their position just because they are good at it. You know, and it goes from a chef or sniper. It's both things. Like, it doesn't really matter. Like, if you are a woman or man or whatever, you have to do the job right. And if there are certain requirements that has to be done because your life depends on that, they cannot just overlook all of that and say, oh, we need one woman in that. I cannot even imagine platoon full of guys and you will put one woman into that thing. It's gonna probably crash the whole platoon. As you said, you guys are like really harsh sometimes to each other, right? Making jokes and stuff.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if girls can take the same kind of behavior towards themselves as well. You would have to probably make sure she doesn't feel like you're harassing her or something.
Yeah, I'm sure some of them can. And that's kind of the sad part too, is I'm sure on the opposite end of the coin,
Mm-hmm.
you don't want to have diversity forced upon you,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, you don't want to exclude for the sake of not wanting diversity.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you had the beastliest woman ever.
Mm-hmm.
She's very good at the job. Her
Mhm.
skin's thicker than
Mhm.
anybody's, and she's getting overlooked because of the politics.
Mm-hmm.
When if it was a really apolitical system where all they cared about is performance, maybe she'd
Performance.
make it through.
Yeah.
I just want the
Yeah.
best teammate.
Exactly, man.
right? I don't give a shit
Yes,
what parts are between their legs.
Exactly. And exactly. Well, some people are not even sure what they actually have there nowadays. But
Yeah.
the thing is, like, exactly, like, and it goes, as I said, from politician to whatever. I don't care how you look or what you do in your free time or whatever, but you have to perform the way how you're asked to perform, and it doesn't matter what it is. And I am really mad that actually this kind of things already got that high that this is a question in either in Army or Marine or even in Navy SEAL. Like I think it was like a month ago I was listening Jocko Willink on his podcast, and he actually talked about it, that there are actually people who are, you know, thinking, oh, we should have a woman in a Navy SEAL, you know, like platoons. And he's like, there's
Why?
no way.
For the photo op?
Yeah, and he's like, there's no way. And I would feel so bad actually if the woman would just like come to our platoon, because the environment that we usually operate in is not made for women, period, you know.
Yeah.
And the way how we explain it is, man, everybody with like IQ over whatever has to say like, yeah, that's a point.
It doesn't make sense.
So once you pass all that, how fast can you get to, let's say, deployment?
Depends on the op tempo. So before my time, during the big wars, so the big push in Afghanistan, maybe in 2008, there was all the stuff early in the Iraq war as well. Guys would finish basic, they'd finish combat training, they'd get to their unit with their sea bag and their happy little green face, and the people in charge of them would be like, don't even bother unpacking. You're leaving, you know, in less than a week or in a couple of days. And some guys would literally pump out that same time. Now things weren't quite as crazy when I was in. So there was a large workup before you would get to do a deployment. So you're preparing, you're working with the people you're going to work with, you're doing tactical stuff, you're doing technical stuff, you're trying to cover all your bases, and you're learning about what the mission is going to be. And in the unit that I was in, it operated a little bit differently. The op tempo was pretty high, so we were always doing things. So my job when I got to my unit was get qualified to do that job, because it wasn't just about the MOS that I had before. It was a billet. So I was at the 2nd Raider Support Battalion, which is basically a place for enablers, what we were called, to assist the operators in their deployments. So there'd be operators on teams. They'd have a company that was headed by some more senior operators. Each team would probably have a few enablers, guys with like a technical skill, like a communications or a logistics, and then a company also full of those kind of guys. And so we had to learn a lot more things right away. So we have to go learn, you know, all I did was routing and switching, and I need to know radios now, because I'm the communications guy now. Anything basically with a plug, they're going to expect me to know how to do. So there's a big push to train for that, and then they need to make sure you're tactically sound. So they run you through a lot of more advanced tactical stuff that the MARSOC guys might do. And then you're going to chop after you have done all that, which means you change command over to the guys who are actually deploying. You get to know them, you work with them, and then you're gone. It's usually about 6 months.
Wow. So 6 months after
6 months from the start of a workup to leaving.
Ooh. Okay.
Now actually getting your MOS is a little bit extra time there. That's probably going to take a year, 6 months to a year, depending on when the courses line up, when you can do the schools that you need to do, and they try to fit you in to other stuff when they can. And some guys, just if they needed guys and they weren't totally done, or they needed one piece of training, they were like, well, you're just going to have to deploy and do it after, because we need people.
Really? So they're running short?
Yeah, I mean, there wasn't that many of us. We hit above our weight class, I would say. Sometimes we had a company, like a communications company. Sometimes there'd be like 3 or 4 people there, just because everyone else was either getting ready to deploy or deployed.
Damn,
so
that's it.
It's kind of like if you were there, you were like, all right, what am I doing next?
That
Because I need to go do something now, because nothing's happening here.
That is crazy.
Now, it's growing, that program, but when I was there, it was still, trying to get its legs under it.
Can you change your MOS once you are deployed, let's say? Because
So you can change your MOS. It's a process, but you can change it for a variety of reasons. You're not going to change it in the middle of a deployment, because there's all kinds of paperwork, and There's staffing requirements for all these jobs, right? So you signed a contract. It gave you a certain lane of job. You're going to need to fulfill that contract before you can do what's called a lateral move to another job. And they're only going to let you do that if you're a pretty outstanding Marine, because there's going to be a lot of people that want to move. If there's space in that job, so you could be as outstanding as you want, but if there's no space for you to go be an intelligence guy and you're a logistics guy, then too bad. You can't move. So it's really just what they need. But you can make it happen. Some guys do lateral moves between job types, but it's not that common.
Do you remember when you knew when exactly you are deploying to Iraq? Do you remember that moment when they told you, like, okay, this is the date?
I remember getting told that I was deploying. I don't remember the date, though.
Okay.
Because it was all kind of part of the job.
Yeah, but do you remember when they
like,
told you you're going?
Yeah, they were like, hey, your training's been complete for a couple weeks. We're chopping you to this company. Get ready to go do a workup.
Man, that's crazy, because that means you are going to combat zone.
Yeah.
First time in your life, besides living in Baltimore, you are going to combat zone.
Yeah.
Were you thinking about the risks or no?
No.
You're too young for that?
Probably too young. I wasn't that young. I was in my mid to late 20s. I was 26, I guess, when I found out I was going. 27 when I went. So not that young for a Marine.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
But also you've got a lot of hubris and a ton of confidence existing in that Marine Corps environment. We talked about a bubble already, how Americans are kind of in a bubble.
Yeah.
And of course, you want to go do an adventurous thing to get outside the bubble. But the reality is you join an even smaller, tighter bubble to do that, because life in the military is in a gigantic bubble. So you're full of all this bravado, you're full of all this confidence. Yeah, you know about the risk, but you're like, it's someone else's problem, right? The age-old adage, it'll happen to somebody else, it won't happen to me. I mean, it becomes a reality when people die, though, because they die in training, too.
They die in training?
Yeah, because, I mean, you're doing a lot of dangerous training. You're flying aircraft all over the place, and like half of one of our teams, a C-130 crashed on the way to a training exercise. They're just gone, and you got to keep going.
How does this affect the whole unit right after that happens?
It's not good, especially since the schedule doesn't change, right? We still have to deploy. This happened right before I chopped, so I hadn't even met any of the guys, and they're all real raw from that, right? Because they're not in the mood to be meeting new people.
Yeah.
Right after, all their friends are dead.
Yeah.
So
you are pretty much going as a replacement, right?
Not really. We were going to go either way.
Yeah, but still.
But yeah, the replacements for that team I feel even worse for. Because you're already kind of an outsider when you had the job that I had as an enabler. There's not enough of us to be permanently attached to like a group or a company. So we get cycled in. That's why we deployed so much. Because they're like, oh, we need these communications guys, these dog handlers, these intelligence guys. There's not enough of them to go around. So you go meet a set of new guys. You go do the mission with them. You come back. You're going to work up with a new set of guys who are going out.
How does it work when you are going to Iraq? What city do you go to first? Like Kabul or? Kabul is Afghanistan.
Yeah, Kabul.
Well, so you go first, like, because I've been told that sometimes you don't go directly like to Iraq, but you go first to some other ally, let's say country, and then you go, or you go directly to Iraq, let's say to Baghdad, or.
You could go directly, but it usually doesn't happen that way. Usually you're stopping at who knows what amount of air bases, friendly countries. I mean, we've got friendly countries all over Europe that usually people stop at first.
Oh, so you go to Europe. So you don't go, let's say, to Afghanistan, and then from Afghanistan, like, to go to Iraq.
Well, Afghanistan wouldn't make sense anyways, just because it's further, technically, from where Iraq is.
It depends, like, from where you are also deploying, right? If you are stationed, let's say, somewhere in Asia, then maybe it would make more sense. But if you are going from, like, East Coast USA, then that's probably more
East Coast, you're usually going to end up in Europe somewhere, maybe at a big airbase in Germany. Spain, Turkey, any of these places can, have an Air Force presence that you'll basically stage there and then continue. But yeah, I mean, we landed in Erbil, which is in the north, in the Kurdish region.
I'm gonna open
of Iraq.
I want to see it because, man, like,
Erbil's cool, man.
For me, this area of This area of the world is just like one big unknown. I swear to God, because it's so different than anything that I know or anything I have ever seen, you know?
And it's very confusing too, because all these borders on the map here,
Yeah, they doesn't
are
really make
bullshit.
sense, right?
yeah,
So you said
pretty much
that,
all of them are
so
bullshit.
you said you went to Erbil?
Yeah.
That's this one, right?
Mm-hmm.
See, they got zero traffic there right now. Nice circle. So that's
Yeah, if
where...
you put the satellite view, I wonder if it's still the same if the pictures have updated. It used to be almost all white cars out there.
White cars.
Yeah, I'm not really sure why,
Why white
but
cars?
every vehicle was white.
Man, every time I zoom into like those cities, I'm like, damn, what would I do there?
Oh, you go to the Citadel. The Citadel is cool.
Citadel's cool. This city looks pretty cool, man. It's like
Oh, it
one
is.
big circle. Everything is circle.
Uh-huh.
So that's where you land. What was your first impression of Iraq at that time?
Smelled different. That was the very first impression, because it does.
How?
Also, we got there during the rainy season,
Uh-huh.
and Iraq gets very dusty, obviously in the dry parts.
Uh-huh.
And then when it rains,
See it, man. It's just
it's
dry.
dirt. It's dirt rain.
Dirt rain.
So it smells different than like rain you would get here,
Uh-huh.
right? So you show up and you're like, this place is interesting. And I'm at the airport, so I don't really see anything. I'm going around, I'm doing normal things, getting situated in. It only started getting interesting once you get into the city and in the mountains up north, because those are some pretty places. And the city's very interesting
So
just because it's not
Mm-hmm.
it's not what you're told Iraq is going to be like. Erbil is kind of an exception, and a lot of places up north are. But even compared to Mosul, Erbil is pretty different.
Really?
Yeah.
So would you say that some of those cities are, let's say, better than some American cities? Let's say, is
Yeah.
Erbil better than Detroit?
Erbil is definitely better than Detroit, and it's better than a lot of areas in Los Angeles.
Damn, that's crazy, right? Americans have no idea about that.
Yeah.
And do you think it's because of the American presence, or it's the way how it always used to be? Like
I
half and half?
I don't think it's all about the American presence. We certainly helped, especially with stability while we were there,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because we're funding, the training of the local
Mm-hmm.
armies so they can keep security. Because I was there post the ISIL or ISIS push. They pushed through in 2014 all throughout Iraq, and the Kurds have for a while governed this sort of autonomous region. It's not its own country, but Iraq, the government of Iraq, recognizes that they're in control of this area up north.
Mm-hmm. And do they respect them or not? Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it's very easy. I think there's a lot of like Iraqi propers that would rather just have that. But it's compared to the rest of the greater Kurdish region, it's probably the area where they're getting the most respect. Because, I mean, in Turkey, they're just getting bombed.
Yeah, no one
Turkey
cares
talks
about
about how they would support like a Kurdish region, but only in Iraq, like not in Turkey, right? And Iran, it's the same way. They're really not trying to have an independent region break off. And in Syria, the only reason they even established a foothold is because of the civil war in like 2016. So
Isn't it crazy that Turkey is bombing someone and no one cares about it?
yeah, it's crazy that they're not the only ones.
Yeah, and they are not the only ones.
Not
right?
even remotely the only ones.
That is crazy. So you got here to Erbil, and like, is there some, let's say, a base where you are staying, and then you are leading the operations from there, or you guys are being sent always to the areas where there's some certain problem?
There's a base, of course, like there always is, but you're out and about a little bit, kind of scattered around to regions of interest when you need to be there, if that makes sense.
And how long this mini deployment in the inside of the Iraq already can take? Is it like they're gonna send you to the region for like a week or a month or?
Oh, you'll, I mean, if you're there, let's say you're there for 6 months to a year, depending on what needs to be done, and how everything is going, you might bounce between a lot of locations when you're there. You might be at a place for a week, or you might just visit for a day, or you might go down for a few days, or you might be there for multiple weeks, because I would jet down to other places further south to work on things, and I'd be there for weeks.
What is the most south you went from this area?
Here, probably Kayara, which is in the middle of nowhere. I don't even know if I could tell you where it is. Not as far as...
Is it a big city?
No.
Okay.
There was an airfield there
That way we'll probably not even find
That
Man, it's just all
that
sand.
ISIL really fucked up before we were there.
It's just all sand. It's crazy. Yeah, we'll probably not even find it. So pretty much you are on deployment in Iraq, but inside of the deployment there is a lot of mini deployments based on where they actually need you. They're gonna send you from that, like, let's say, safe zone of a US base. They're gonna send you to like immediate danger where they need you to be, right?
Yeah, so there's going to be places that are significantly more dangerous. Even when we were there in a relatively peaceful time, so the Kurds had kind of already done most of the brunt of the fighting against ISIL. There's still a lot of pockets of ISIS or ISIL that were around, especially in the mountains in the middle of nowhere land.
Yeah.
But yeah, relatively safe speaking, especially in Erbil, which is, like I said, I felt safer in a lot of places in Erbil than I did in LA. And that's an active war zone, so I mean, you can think whatever you want about that, but I mean, you'll go to places that are more dangerous or less controlled or not controlled by the Kurds, which also is
So are the Kurds
different SOP.
great fighters?
They're pretty good. I think they're pretty good and probably better than your average just because they've been forced to fight for everything for millennium.
Forever, right?
Yeah. I mean, they had their own regions in ancient history.
That is crazy.
But not in any kind of modern history. They've been tossed around by all the border redrawings of the colonial era.
Yeah, they're in the middle of everything, so that's why.
And all the powers that be, no matter who they come to, wouldn't ever really consider them. And even when they do get some, they're also a lot of times fighting with themselves. It's just the way things work around there.
Yeah, politics. So
it's lots of fragmented groups.
So they're one ethnicity. What about the other ethnicities in Iraq? Like, what do you actually have there? What are like the civilians like? And can you like spot a difference, being like, oh, those are Kurds, and you can clearly see it, and those are, let's say, a Taliban, and they are like just looking different, behaving different, like.
It wasn't as easy for me to tell. I bet you some of the more like, experienced guys could probably tell, guys that had been there for 10 years or whatever. But you can tell by the language right away with Kurds because they speak a different language. It's like kind of like an Iranian
and you can tell the difference?
Almost. Yeah, it's written different. It sounds different than a lot of other Arabic that's spoken around there. So you can tell from that. You can also tell by how happy they are. Kurds were generally a lot happier than Iraqis. Yeah.
But why? Because they live on its own, or?
I mean, they kind of live in a nice place where the Iraqis don't.
Oh, okay.
I mean, the south is significantly worse, in my
South
opinion,
of
in Iraq.
Iraq.
There's a lot of open desert and not a lot of infrastructure.
Got it.
Because the Iraqi government...
They don't care.
No, and to be fair to everyone in that region, they haven't had a chance to care because they've been at war for like thousands of years over there. So it's just one thing into the next with this region and other places like it. But I mean, they always seemed pretty happy when we were visiting a mountain town, at least the friendly ones, and even the guys you train, like, I don't know, they remind me of Americans. It's a weird thing, their interests. So they like pop culture, they like music, and they like their politics. So pretty similar to us. Difference is they just live in a war zone and we don't.
Do you eat their food or you have your own?
We eat their food for the most part because it just makes sense logistically to do that. It's good. The bread's really good because they make it fresh.
Is it spicy like their kitchen?
Not really. I mean, I grew up on a lot of Cajun food, so
you're used to
maybe I'm biased.
Yeah.
But it wasn't. I mean, there was some spicy stuff, but like the street food's real good there too. Like, I mean, every corner you can get like fresh shawarma, and since everything is coming from, that guy knows the butcher, that guy has his farm, the bread's made the same day. It's all pretty good.
Fresh.
They had water issues was the one thing they did have.
Oh, well,
infrastructure.
I can see, it's just desert. Like.
Yeah, and if you ate, your body probably wouldn't be used to all the things in the meat there, so some guys would get sick eating the meat at first.
Takes a while, right?
Yeah, you adapt. But it tasted pretty good to me. I never got sick.
How about the guys from like the Islamic State? Like how do you guys encounter someone like this? Because everything that I know about them is what I saw online, and that's freaking just crazy shit, like every day.
They're pretty crazy.
There were a period of the time when every day when I opened the news, I just saw, oh, ISIS killed this amount of people. They did this, they did that. Just horrible stuff every day. How do you encounter someone like this? Like, is your only goal just to eliminate them, period?
Preferably very far away, preferably with close air support. And yeah, use airstrikes.
Just go.
That's the best way. Because they're I mean, it's kind of the same with all those extreme like Sunni groups, like that just take things way too far. So ISIS, you have the Taliban that was also kind of in a similar vein, not the same group at all, in a different location entirely, but there's not really a whole lot of negotiating. There was definitely less with ISIS than there was with the Taliban, because at least the Taliban had some local leaders and people that were willing to not like shoot you on sight, so they could talk to locals, and then in turn locals could talk to us. That didn't really exist as far as I was aware with ISIS. It was, they're just steamrolling stuff. They want to start the new caliphate or whatever.
Just crazy.
Pretty irrational.
Just crazy, man.
And yeah, I mean, they're steamrolling through villages, just killing whoever they want to kill. So
killing
yeah,
their
fuck
own.
them, light them up.
Yeah, killing their own, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what is like the main difference between like a ISIS and Taliban? To us, it all seems the same. A guy with AK-47 and...
it seems similar, but they're in totally different locations. So ISIS, the name, like the actual, like, I guess etymology, would that be the word, of the name? They're talking about
Islamic
Syria.
State.
Yeah, Islamic State of Syria. Sometimes
Levant.
also referred to as Syria and Iraq, or ISIL. So it would be like the Levant, which is a region. None of that stuff is near Afghanistan. Afghanistan's across the other side of Iran in a very different environment. And the Taliban have a different history entirely. ISIS is pretty new in terms of their history. They cropped up like recently within our lifetimes. The Taliban, they go back way, way further. Because it started in a similar manner of like foreign fighters coming in to defend what would be perceived as a land that they want to keep. But they developed into two very different groups. Now, they might communicate, but I don't know how much, to be honest, because they're both doing very different things in different regions. The Taliban were literally trying to control and run Afghanistan, which they eventually do now.
So at the time you were there, you were
ISIS,
dealing mostly with ISIS?
Yeah, only with ISIS.
Only with ISIS?
Yeah.
Can you tell me...
There's no Taliban in Iraq, for example.
Really? I thought they are everywhere, man.
No, that's the other confusing thing about the radical Islamic terrorist groups. There's a million of them, and a lot of them go by a different name. A lot of them are very similar, but they're not in the same places. Like, you have a very similar group to ISIS in Africa, but they're just, they're the Boko Haram. They're under the same umbrella, but they're not the same group. They're not flying back and forth, right? And they're not that united. They're pretty fractured, like everything is over
But
there.
they're crazy the same way.
Oh yeah,
right?
They're the same kind of crazy in terms of like chopping people's heads off and
man, that's
all that
just
fun stuff.
Freaking insane. And once you see those type of things, you cannot unseen it, And that's just a video. I can't even imagine being actually in that desert and knowing that this whole thing is actually going on around me. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Like, every time I see this harsh environment, I can't even imagine to be there and be like able to survive. I mean, like how hard it can actually get up there, and you have full gear and you're carrying everything with yourself.
Really, really hot. So in the summer, it's going to be, above 110 into the 120s, scorching dry heat. Now, the answer to this is work smart, not hard. You're not going to be able to wear full kit and wander around all day in 120 degree heat, at least not very effectively. You might be able to, but that's going to be a pretty useless patrol because they're going to wander. People's focus is going to be gone almost immediately. You're going to be super dehydrated. You have to carry a ton of water. What are you really going to do? So the answer is don't do anything during the day when it's hot. You sleep during the day.
So you operate at night?
Yeah, where it's way cooler.
So you go on the patrols at night?
Yeah, I mean, anything you want to do would preferably be done at night.
Damn.
Because
but it means
people are asleep and the weather permits a lot easier.
But if they are asleep, you can't really get anything done, or can you?
Well, it's a lot easier to get, like, it's a lot easier to attack someone that's asleep than someone that's not asleep.
Oh yeah, of course, but you have to know.
So if you know, if you know
Yeah.
if you've been working up on the location of, some pocket of ISIS that's hiding out in the mountains, why would you attack during the day? Like, what advantage? They can see you, whereas, I mean, at night we can see better than they can. They don't have the best equipment.
Maybe now they do have.
Yeah, I mean, they've always had some.
you left.
Whether they
today.
can keep it running is another
Oh yeah,
story.
that's another thing.
Because they love to parade around in their helicopters, but
it's just
I
crazy because like
doubt they're keeping that running.
because when you said that you go to attack a packet of ISIS at night and they're hiding in the mountains, man, this is freaking crazy.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't do that on foot though. That wouldn't be a direct.
Well, of course.
Actually, you
I
wouldn't just
can't
wander
even-
up there with dudes. In
Just
fact,
climbing uphill.
there's really not a whole lot of wandering around with dudes. That stuff is really risky. Ideally, you want to. That kind of operation is not going to be done unless it absolutely has to be. It's really risky. It's really complicated because you're putting people right in the mix with the enemy. If you can accomplish the goals of what you want to without doing that or using a partner force, you will. So if there's definitely no civilians, if there's definitely no valuable infrastructure, airstrike every time. Why would we want to get all done up, wander all the way out there, risk getting shot at, risk getting blown up, risk something getting complicated when you can just call in an F-18? And
in such an
blow them up?
environment, how do you know who is a civilian and who is the enemy?
That's pretty hard. ISIS made it a little bit easier, though. Traditionally, over there, all the insurgencies over the decades, it was very hard to tell. And you really couldn't besides behavior. Behavior cues, if they had radios or cell phones, guys standing on top of rooftops doing nothing, like military-age men.
Oh, that's
Kinda
already
doing that,
suspicious.
sitting around. Yeah, and they'll even have, they'll have kids. So let's say you're wandering around in a city. You might not see the real guy that's watching you, but you'll see all of his army all the time. Because as you walk between the blocks, you'll see like a little girl or a little kid, like a 7, 8-year-old, just staring at you, like standing next to a telephone pole, like locked eyes with you. And you're just like,
That's
hey,
weird.
dude, what's up? You go to another block and there's another one. They're just watching you.
But how do they?
But you know
send-
someone's out there, but you don't necessarily know.
How do they
what they're
send
doing.
the messages? The kids
Oh, they're pretty creative.
are they sophisticated?
Yeah, signals or just cell phones. I mean, they got cell out there. They got radios.
That is great.
So like think like a walkie-talkie, like a VHF radio or a UHF radio.
And besides the signaling, do they also like? Are the kids also involved in the
In
fighting?
fighting? Oh yeah, in some places they are.
Is it more like a ISIS or Taliban thing?
That was more of a Taliban thing. But I mean, they're not the only ones. That's real common in Africa. You see all kinds of kids fighting in Africa.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's a good choice for them because they know we're not going to shoot at kids. So
Are you not?
kind of puts people in a compromising position. I mean, if one's shooting at you, you will.
Yeah, of course.
You know,
I mean,
but-
if you see a 10-year-old carrying AK-47,
Yeah, ideally you don't want to just light him up
yeah, right.
because I mean, what choice does that kid have?
Man, that is
Sucks.
crazy. That is really, really bad. It's crazy because, and that's exactly what we talked about when we started. Because it's like this region or this type of war is completely different than what we live. What is our reality, The thing is like, we live in the year 2022. You have some moral standards. You have some this and that, right? And they go against that because they know if they're gonna send, let's say, 10-year-old with a gun, the chances that you are gonna think one more second is maybe the time required for them to approach them close enough so they can blow him up and blow you up, right?
Yeah,
So it's like a conflict of two different worlds, and for that fact, I don't think that this can be solved.
Mm-mm.
Period.
No, that's another American exceptionalist problem, right? We love to think that we can solve any problem,
Mm-hmm.
but we can't.
Besides,
At least not quickly, right? And not without a lot of things going wrong along the way. Because yeah, you can't win a war like that, at least not long term, because even if tactically it makes sense, it gives them an extra second to shoot. Even if that didn't matter,
Mhm.
you're still going to have very low morale on our side
Oh,
if
yeah.
you have to fight a bunch of kids.
Yeah.
Because the people you send over there are like, well, I had to shoot a bunch of kids. I mean, we saw the same exact thing in Vietnam when people are they're trying to make sure that the NVA can't use all these tunnels and do all this sneaking around. They're like, well, we can just blast them out with napalm. But the people on the ground see that a lot of those people are civilians, their kids all burnt up, and they come back not about that at all. And so now you've lost them as a supporter of that war, and you have a much lower morale in general in the country and in the military, which means the military is going to do a worse job. So, yeah, that's not really winnable by the traditional sense.
It's not like a typical ISIS tactic to use kids
I mean, they absolutely would. Everything was in their playbook, but it's just not something that I really encountered. But there were plenty of younger people. A lot of ISIS fighters are teenagers, right? They go to university wherever they go to, and they get the calling. They're radicalized somehow.
Yeah, they radicalize them.
Or they need cash,
Who's funding that shit?
It's hard to tell.
I would say that everybody.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be lovely if we could blame one person, but we can't?
Yeah, of course.
In the same way that we can't blame one country for the reason the borders look like shit. Once enough buckets have had the raindrop in it, it's hard to tell. So.
How does your typical, let's say, patrol look like? I mean, it's kind of hard to say typical, right? But
there's not really a typical patrol.
What is your duty on that patrol? Just the radio
communications. Yeah, communications.
And how big is your platoon?
So that's going to vary whether you have partner forces or not, but it's usually around 12 guys. And 12. As small as 4 if you're just doing like a real low-key reconnaissance. Because sometimes, you're not really in a hostile area, but you just want to get pattern of life on a region. And what that means is you just want to look at an area and watch it for days, a week, weeks, and just see what's actually happening here. So we can find the things that aren't supposed to be here. So this is another thing, like you said, how do you distinguish friend from foe? You watch a village for a week. You're going to find out real quick who actually lives there.
Oh, okay.
Who takes care of the goats, who, goes to the well every morning, and who the people that roll up, that suddenly everyone looks weird, they go get somebody out of a different building, and then things are done, and that person leaves, and you're like, well, who is that? Who is that guy? We need to follow that guy. He doesn't belong here. And you start to put the pieces together. And you might only have like 4 people out on a patrol like that. But even then, in Iraq, those patrols weren't as common because we didn't need them. We had big air superiority. So the same thing can be accomplished with a drone.
Oh, okay.
Which is better, right? Because we don't have to go.
Of course.
You don't have to send guys out there.
Yeah.
It's less risky. Now, places like Afghanistan, you had historically a lot more of those because it's hard to look around in the mountains without being down on the ground.
Have you seen any casualties, like personally?
Not from friends. So none of my friends or anyone like in the U.S. got shot over there or got blown up over there.
Okay.
We were pretty lucky. Plenty of enemy casualties, though.
Well, obviously, that's the reason
kind of why we were there.
Do you think that more casualties you guys make, to them, do you feel like that stronger the resistance against you were, or so?
To an extent, yeah. So it goes both ways. The popular narrative that people know about is you're creating enemies.
I've been told that by Vietnam vets. They told me longer we were in Vietnam, more Viet Cong there were.
Yeah, because if you're doing it, especially if you're doing it the way they were doing it, and in many ways that we were doing it too,
and stuff like that.
Bombing villages, destroying infrastructure. If you're going over somewhere to be friends with someone, you don't blow up their home and like shoot their friends and say, hey, we're here to protect you. They're like, no, you're not. You just came here and ruined my village, and you killed my son or you killed my father. I hate you now forever. And so that creates enemies. Now, to an extent, ISIS is different because there weren't many people that were fans of ISIS. The only fans of ISIS were ISIS, right?
Even the locals, the civilians hate them as well?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because they would roll through and do way worse than we would.
That is crazy.
So we might, obviously, we don't have a good track record either. And it's impossible to just not fuck shit up on accident.
I mean, it's war.
At a war with this scale, but ISIS went there on purpose, and they were very barbaric in the way they did it. So, yeah, at that point, even if they didn't like us before, they're like, well, if it's between you guys and ISIS rolling through our village, we'd rather have you. Damn. And so Yeah, they hated them. So if you can inflict a lot of casualties on ISIS and keep things somewhat stable, they'll like you because they're like, hey, I know things are getting blown up, but they were going to get blown up either way with ISIS. At least ISIS isn't rolling through our villages and raping our women, and we can try to set up an economy, and we train their forces so they can take care of themselves, which they like because all they really want is to be an independent state.
They just live, right?
Yeah.
Man, people are the same everywhere. They just want to live.
They
But
really
there's
just
always
wanna
some
live.
certain idiots who are just gonna come and fuck shit up. That's so common. It's so common. So would you say that the regular Iraqis were, I don't want to say fan of yours, but like they were at least not the enemies, right?
They weren't the enemies. It was like a cautious alliance, right? They appreciated that we were there to help, but they also understood that it was just business.
They tolerate you there.
Yeah, they were like, you guys are all right for now. Some of them really did like us more. The Kurds liked us a lot, generally, because we spent a lot more time with them, and we just aligned philosophically on a lot more things with the Kurds than we did with the Iraqis. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say they were fans, but they were okay with it. And from their point of view, you have to think of it's just been a constant stream of foreigners coming in, trying to tell them what to do with their country
for centuries.
And so they have basically a back catalog of how shitty was this group, how shitty was this group, and they see us and they're like, I mean, it's all right, I guess. They have a lot of money and they're giving us stuff, and some of them turn out to be friendly and do really buy in, and you could call them like a friend and like a good group of loyal people. Some of them, the loyalty is just going to be like,
yeah,
stay here,
Give
us stuff, we might steal it from you.
Based on previous experience, they already know how to deal with you guys, because you are, as you said, you are just one of the many who roll through that area through centuries, right?
I don't know why we're not special in that regard, right? So even though we tend to think we are, we're not to them, because they've seen it through generations. They're like, yeah, whatever. This is another empire rolling through here. They'll leave when they get bored, which of course we did. So
were there ever a
right.
situation when you thought you are done, you're finished?
No,
No,
I think I got pretty lucky.
Is it because your, let's say, tactical skill, or equipment, or just consciousness, or?
Probably mindset and also luck, because I was there and it wasn't that kinetic and nothing super crazy actually happened in terms of like endangering the team or any of the Marines. Scary stuff definitely happened to plenty of teams over the years. I mean, you got the memorial wall right in the middle of the base, and there's a lot of names on it. But yeah, we just, we had a relatively speaking in a war zone, a pretty relaxed deployment over there.
Do you think if it would be at the same time, let's say on the south of the Iraq, it would be more peaceful, or it would be more dangerous?
The south was significantly more dangerous. That's where all the pockets of ISIS. The southwest, in the no man's land of Iraq, if you zoom out here, you'll see a trend. So right now we're at Kirkuk. You see kind of all of this tan here in Iraq? This is nothing. There's not a whole lot going on here.
Yeah,
good places for ISIS to hide, right?
There's nothing. There's just once in a while there's some road.
Yeah, and the trend continues northwest all the way up the country. So you have all of this stuff in here, because the water doesn't run down there. Here's the mountains, and then the ravine, and then there's just desert. So over here, there's not a whole lot going on in terms of civilization. So when ISIS got defeated and pushed back, they ended up sort of retreating into little independent pockets around here.
Where they could
So this is more dangerous, because they could move around here, they could organize, they could get things going, and they could attempt to make attacks. But yeah, the north was significantly more peaceful, even in the big built-up cities, even in places like Mosul, where there's crime in Mosul and things, and it's not like a fancy first world city, but it was still a lot more peaceful than.
What kind of equipment do you carry on the patrol? Like when it comes to like rifles and stuff like that, what do you have?
Probably M4s.
Okay.
Most guys would have, all reliable. Yeah.
And you carry the same what they carry, even when you are like a radio guy?
Yeah, I mean, we would have to carry some additional equipment sometimes. It depends if the team leader wanted the radio or not. But
yeah,
if a guy has a special role, he might have a special piece of equipment.
Got it.
But generally, it's good to keep it really simple with rifles. Unless you have like a sniper or a long gunner, he might have a different weapon system. He's still got his normal rifle for normal work.
Okay.
But if he
On
needs
top
to
of
employ
that.
that weapon system, he can.
Okay.
If you have like me as a communicator, I'm going to have like a computer with me. I'm also going to have a bigger radio that can do different bands of radio, so satellite communications, and that's too heavy to put on a normal guy. Like, not everybody needs it, so just the communicator guy will have it.
What's your secondary weapon? Can you pick that, or?
Yeah, I mean, I just used a Glock.
Okay.
You can kind of pick it in the sense that the Marine Corps will train you on a variety of them. So you have the Beretta, which is pretty common, especially among the old school guys. Newer school guys like me like the Glock. I always liked a Glock anyways, just because I think they're fantastic.
Could you have Colt 1911?
Some real old school guys did. I never met anyone that actually carried one, but they were around. They're in the armory, so I know somebody was using them.
I mean, it's like the real American thing.
And they were standard issue for a long time in the Marine Corps too.
All right.
So yeah,
Interesting.
they made
And
their
what
way
is
around.
what is the typical what ISIS carry? Of course, AK-47, right? I guess.
Yeah, AK-47s, RPKs, big machine guns, the Dishkas. where they're
Simple
like
but
their-
effective,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, 88 millimeter mortars that they stole from us. Anything they could get their hands on, honestly. ISIS was a little bit of a weird one because they were an amalgamation. It happened very fast. And so a lot of
they just pop
they
out
were
of nowhere.
They were shoot and loot.
Yeah.
So they could terrorize an area, take over a force, and maybe surround them that wasn't really prepared to fight. Guys that were given equipment by either the Iraqi army or by us via proxy, the Iraqi army, or Kurds that they would attack and surround and just take that equipment. So they'd have Humvees, they'd have M4s too. Now, would they be able to service all this stuff?
Yeah.
Obviously not, because their push didn't last very long.
Mhm.
But I mean, they had
They had
armored personnel carriers and things that they'd would
So
eventually get.
did you have to actually count with the did you have to actually count with the situation that they can actually have some armored vehicles as well? Because when you have just rifles, how would you deal with that?
Not by the time we were there.
Okay.
That was more during their big push, and I wasn't there for that. But they definitely had some functioning armored vehicles, or what you considered up-armored vehicles. So like not a tank, but a
Yeah,
pretty robust
armored, yeah.
vehicle.
Okay.
But again, they don't have any air power, so
So you just
as
bomb
soon
the
as
shit.
as soon as airstrikes started happening, that stuff
How about the
had to get
airstrikes?
dispersed.
How about the airstrikes? How long it takes since the time you call for an airstrike to get it?
Depends on how close your aircraft on station is. It can be pretty quick if it's an actual like close air support vehicle.
What quick means?
Oh, like
Seconds?
not seconds, but like 10 minutes.
And the long means like
Yeah, hours.
hours.
Yeah. Because you might not necessarily need it to happen right away.
Oh, yeah,
It
of
might not be
course.
time sensitive.
Yeah,
So we might be watching something and be like, okay, we've watched this guy for a while. We bugged his phone. We know he's here. We know he's with only enemy, and he's out in a tent in the middle of nowhere. This is perfect for an airstrike. So, and because we've watched Pattern of Life for ages, we know he's not going anywhere in the next couple of hours. So we don't need to pull unnecessary resources. We're like, hey, when's our next aircraft going to be in this area with the right armament? Boom. Hey, we've got a target for you. And then, yeah, lay it on and you assess the effects after. And hopefully you get your guy. The one problem with airstrikes, as convenient as they are, because you can, literally do it from an air-conditioned room, there's not a whole lot of confirmation on what you're getting unless you have people down there.
Yeah.
So
it's like a combination of two things. You can always
Without-
drop the bomb, but you have to know the effect, right?
without ground support, it can be hard to tell. Now, you can still get a good reading on effects without ground support sometimes. But if you're trying to figure out if one person is dead, it can be tricky. So if you're looking for a high-value target, that can be trickier unless you really have a lot of good intel and you really can confirm with a high confidence that it's that guy that you're seeing on the ISR. And you can see, the impact of the weapon system hit him, and then you're like, okay, well,
We got him.
he's in a couple pieces, so he's gone.
That's crazy. My friend who was in Afghanistan, he was there as a Czech special forces. I didn't even know we had special forces. I'm trying to get him here on this seat.
You guys do. I wanted to train with him.
You know what is crazy? Most Czech people don't even know about it. They only think we got like a medical personnel and like a chemical units.
It's kind of the way it's supposed to be.
But the stories he told me I was shocked, to be honest. I didn't even know our guys participate in that on this level and that they are that good. I just couldn't believe that. I'm trying to get him on the seat. I'm seeing him once in a while. He's
Yeah,
such
get
a
him in
cool
here,
good.
man.
His wife wants to, but he's like still resistant. But man, that would be so good, because he actually explained me one of those airstrikes in Afghanistan, but he said that there was no plane available for that strike at that moment, and they need it because they were about to do a patrol in some valley, but there was a guy on the top of the mountain, and he was with the radio telling the, because they bug a phone and they knew he's talking about them, about positions, whatever, and they said that the only bomb that they had available was 500-pound bomb.
Did they just wipe him off the face of the earth?
Yes, and it's crazy because he also told me that when they called the airstrike, and it was like, okay, that's the only thing we have available, and it's like, all right, that's what we have to do. So they drop it, and the guy with the radio on the hill, he was still like reporting, and then at one moment, all those like guys who were there, they just like were staring at the mountain, and the guy said to the radio, to that, I think it was Taliban, he was like, hey, it's kind of odd. They're all just staring my direction right now. And then, man,
bad news, buddy.
I saw the picture of the mountain before and after and during. It was like a volcano.
It's a big bomb. 500 pounds is a huge bomb.
Yeah, right.
That's supposed to destroy houses and buildings.
They use
not a mortar spotter. Or whatever that guy was.
They just use it for him because they're like, we have nothing. We have to get rid of him, and there's nothing we actually can do. So they did that, and I didn't even know like the Czech forces were actually like involved in this thing, you know. It was very new information for me, and the airstrikes is something I see in the games, you know. Oh, airstrike available, you just press it, but in reality, man, it must be crazy.
It's different in reality.
It must be crazy. So when you went to Iraq, you must go there with some certain like idea, what is this whole thing about, and like how life works, you know, and certain idea about politics or whatever. How much does this whole thing change after like this experience of actually being in there? Do you look at the world with different
Yeah, you definitely
eyes?
do, whether you consciously realize it right away or not.
Mm-hmm.
And it probably took me a while to realize all the different things that changed. You know, I used to think that people were more, I guess the biggest one would be, I used to think that people in power had a lot more control than they really do. So in general, we are just not really in control of a lot of things that are happening. That's people, by the way. That's not just a government. That's not just the U.S. People in general have an exceptionalist quality that think we can control things, but we really don't. Our best plans from the most successful organizations are still pretty much disasters. They're still barely functioning, held together with popsicle sticks and duct tape. So the fact that anything happens is kind of amazing, but when you go out to get one result and you get a different result, I mean, that's the normal. That's like the 99% normal.
So you go there certain intention and you get something else out of it, and
Yes,
you're like, that's
absolutely.
normal.
And you're like, you know what? That's okay. Close enough. And that's just the reality of how things really work. At least the first time I really saw it for real, I was like, okay, so this is what people are like fighting and dying for, and it's a shit show. So there's no way anything else is less of a shit show, because it all seems, it's all starting to seem like it is. And I start to put the pieces together. I'm like, okay, no wonder we can't get anything done here either, because nothing's even at stake back here.
You mean in the U.S., right?
Yeah, back in the U.S., you know, nothing's at stake and we can't figure it out. When lives are on the line, we still can't figure it out. Things are broken, things aren't working, plans are falling through. It's like, okay. So it becomes, I don't know if it's, I didn't give up or anything like that. This is maybe not the right word.
I know
apathy a little bit, though. A little bit of apathy and a little bit of like, you care less, so it's kind of liberating. You're like, oh, okay.
Not a big deal, right?
Yeah.
Because
People can survive this stuff.
Every time you are in such an environment, I'm sure you encounter things that are a big deal, right? Because you are risking your life or your buddies out there or the civilians out there, the kids, women, you know, etc. But a lot of people here, they think the big problem is when Starbucks is out of oat milk, you know.
Perspective is a huge one.
Yeah, right.
And that's the weird thing about that, is it's not necessarily anybody's fault, but it kind of is, right? Like at least that's the way it feels at first. You feel like when I got done with the Marine Corps, I was like kind of wanting to stay, kind of wanting to leave. I was like, there's only so many curtains I can go behind without it really being permanent. I don't want to do this forever. So I want to get out while I'm still pretty much unscathed. And I got lucky with everything. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to leave.
Yeah.
But I hated civilians for a while. I was like, look at these people. They're such clowns. Like, they're so preoccupied with
bullshit.
Yeah, which is just the biggest complete bullshit. And I'm just like, man, are you guys even aware of what's happening around you? Like down the street, let alone in the rest of the world. Like the rest of the world's still going on, by the way, in case you haven't noticed. But I got over it because it's not necessarily anybody's fault.
Yeah. I understand.
But it also, it leaves like a bitterness for both parties. Because then there's a disconnect, and then it makes it harder to develop empathy with people because they're trying to explain to you that they have a problem in their life and it's affecting them, and I'm just not. I was just like, dude, I don't care.
It's crazy because you see like immediate solution to that problem, right? Because you are used to solving way more difficult problems than that.
Yeah, they're like, oh, this person at work, they keep parking in my parking spot, and I'm like, bro, I don't give a fuck. Yeah. That is not a problem. Like, I understand that your life is going really well, and so it has become a problem because people naturally look for problems, right? They look for problems to solve. That's how our brains work. But my always first instinct was be like, dude, you just need to get some perspective, and you'll be a lot happier. Yeah. Because none of that shit is actually problems. Go hang out in a real problem part of the world, and you'll have real problems.
Yeah. Were you thinking like that also before that, or no?
A little bit. I think I thought I was.
Yeah.
But you're naive, and all you've done is like read about it in books and philosophy online, and it doesn't really mean anything until you actually step out of your comfort zone, right?
What do you think of people who are like so war hungry? They want US to go to war, but they never been in any, and they never seen a combat.
Yeah, it kind of tells, doesn't it? It's usually the people who are barking the loudest.
Yeah.
Either don't know what they're talking about, or they have an ulterior motive.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can also be experienced and want to go to war, but usually that comes from unfinished business, from what I've seen. Most of the guys, like the career guys that I'd meet that were not really trying to hang out in the States, as soon as they came back, they were like, get me on another deployment. I want to get out of here. I don't like this place. I want to just go fight. Those people, I think it was unfinished business. They had started to spend so much of their life over there, they felt more invested over there than they did over here.
Wow.
And so that's just kind of all they knew at that point.
That is great.
And they were really trying to prevent that as I was coming in. They don't want people going on back-to-back-to-back deployments and being gone for 3 years out of the 4 years because it's just not healthy long-term, at least not for an American. Because you're not going to live back over here if you do that.
Yeah.
You're going to leave and go live somewhere else entirely. You're not going to participate.
You're going to switch to different century as well, like here,
Yeah, you'll change permanently.
How about some effects that it may have on you once you are there? You've seen the life, you've seen the combat, you've seen all those like danger zones. Do you have like any, let's say, nightmares or PTSD or something like that? Or do you think about the things you saw out there?
I used to more. It gets better over time. Usually the stuff that sinks in the most is smells. Actually, that was bad for a while.
Oh, okay.
There's some really bad smells when you go to fucked up places.
It's crazy because
burning bodies is horrific. It smells really bad.
I heard that from so many people that they can smell it. One Vietnam veteran, he told me that when he was on the river, on the boat, like patrolling the rivers, and he was shooting the machine gun, he still can smell the sulfur of that until now, and that's like 50 years, more than that. It's crazy how certain things like a smell can stay with you for so long. But smell of burned bodies, I never experienced
that one I think will stick with anybody regardless of whether they were at like a heightened state.
Yeah.
But what happens to people in combat, like that's such a heightened state for your body that it really sinks in a lot of deep memories. So stuff that you won't forget. Sometimes it'll be sights and smells. For a lot of guys, including me, it's like the colors. So you get really sharp colors. And you can almost see like a rainbow out of the muzzle flash of the barrel of weapons when you're shooting them. Especially on a machine gun is where I noticed it. So you can have these wild colors. And for some reason, I remember that. And that seems like it was yesterday. But then also there's large parts of memories that are not there. Or that are really blurry, or they're in the wrong places. These are the most common things for me, and I think for a lot of people. Because it messes with your head when you're at like that high level of stress, and your brain won't make memories the same. Like they're fragmented and they're really raw all at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Wow, that's crazy. How do you think it's the best way to deal with such a thing? Like to just start to live again?
Yeah. You got to do stuff.
Do stuff, right?
Do stuff.
Because if you're just going to be at home bored and watch TV, that's probably not going to help,
because I did all that bullshit. I got out and I was like, I made probably the worst possible decision, which was like, I'm not going to do anything. I've saved enough money. I'm just going to go live in California. I've always wanted to live there. Let me just go live there. When you don't have anything to do and you've just spent the last many years of your life getting told what to do, suddenly you're coming up with it. It's just a recipe for depression. You just being in a cycle. Yeah. Like there's no point in still dwelling on it. Like I left.
That is crazy. On
my own volition. So move on, find new things to do. And that's really the best way to do it.
Is there something that actually US provides for people who will come back from deployment?
Yeah, they're pretty good actually about that these days. I know that for many, many years, especially for, like Vietnam era guys, there was nothing. But nowadays they got all kinds of support programs that the military either provides directly or works closely with volunteers that work in the programs, and they'll have, people on base. When you get back, you get an assessment. They're always down to talk to you. They're down to help you with stuff. So at least at the MARSOC community, they were great. They always had.
Okay.
They did a pretty good job about supporting, like for what you can, a work-life balance and like a mental health. They did a pretty good job at supporting that.
How often did you have to shoot?
Not often at all. Not at people with a rifle. You really don't want to. The idea is you have the forces you train do most of that. So you're out of harm's way. Okay. And we call in airstrikes. That's the point. And yeah, I didn't have to do any direct action mission that involved me like, blowing someone away right in front of me. But, sometimes you'll still have to shoot. It's just not always clear, like you can see your targets or anything like that.
What is the percentage of people out there who know how to read and write?
Out in Iraq? In the Kurdish region, it was pretty good. In the remote regions, I don't know, actually. Probably not that great, but pretty decent compared to like Afghanistan.
Because the reason why I'm mentioning that is because when I listened to Joko's podcast, he said that they were used to, they're a SEAL team, so they operate within the SEAL team. But they told them, for this operation, you go and you take Iraqis with you. So you had to put one man to watch every Iraqi so they don't shoot you because they mingle, And he said, how you want to operate something as sophisticated as a SEAL team with a guy who doesn't know right and left?
That's not going to work.
Yeah, they told him, like, go 3 doors, like, south. He doesn't know what's south, what's 3, and right and left.
Yeah, so...
How crazy is that?
The Kurds were better than the Iraqis. And I think Jocko was probably there at an earlier time.
2006.
Yeah, much earlier.
Ramadi.
And, yeah, the Iraqi army was not well educated. So... That would have been a nightmare to work with guys like that. Now the Kurds, they're pretty educated. At least most of the ones that were in the military were pretty educated, and they knew how to read. We could teach them how to read a compass, shoot a rifle, and of course they're not always fully spooled up. Some of them are. It takes a minute to figure out, and they do some pretty stupid shit that we laugh at. But for the most part, they did a pretty good job, and it was easy to work with them because you could tell them. And you'd have like 100 of them, right? So it wasn't like it was a one-to-one thing. We could often watch from a distance without actually really having to be shoulder to shoulder with them and have them assault a compound or a village.
And they still do that.
Yeah.
That's crazy because, like, I think that your actually presence in Iraq is the main reason why they do that. Because if you guys would just leave, I think it would happen the same way like in Afghanistan. This whole thing would just collapse, right?
Yeah, it already happened. As soon as we stopped supporting them over there.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, stuff collapses.
Yeah, because...
Or when even when there was a momentary lapse in support and we were still officially supporting them, they would just get overrun. Because all their confidence disappears when they don't have us with them. So it was a very fragile balance. Like, they could handle it if they believed and they did need some support, particularly air support. That always helps. It's pretty hard to lose a fight when you've got all these jets.
Of course.
artillery and all this other shit helping you out. But I mean, they still fought pretty hard.
You know, when you mentioned that you teach them how to use compass and stuff like that, like that's pretty useful for regular life as well. So you can actually learn in an army a lot of things, or in Marine Corps you can learn a lot of things that you can use in regular life. And regular civilians, let's say 30 years ago, they would know how to do that stuff. But nowadays, that's only things that you can learn like in the Marine or Army. And that's crazy because
it's kind of
regular
sad.
guys, they don't know anything.
I've always been pretty vocal about this with all my friends, that I think it'd be better if people were required to go.
Like but to combat or just to training?
No, to training. And it doesn't have to be the full deal.
Yeah.
My idea would be like, look, you can do reserves, but you should do at least a year or two. And at least do, if you do reserves, you're going to go to basic training.
Mm-hmm.
And you probably shouldn't go to combat if you don't want to.
Mm-hmm.
You should save that for people who are ready to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's enough people to do that already in the regular military. But I think for regular civilians, a lot of Americans are pretty pampered. And they need like a knocking in the face, and to learn how to use some practical skills, and to learn some discipline and some organization when they're young. Just useful. Say, hey, welcome to the world. This is the finishing school.
Yes. Yeah,
you did your high school. Welcome to the finishing school. Here's a little bit of reality.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to fully participate. We just need you for like a year or two in the reserves. And I think people would be largely better off.
Man, even 6 months would be enough. Like, because if you compare it 0 or 6 months, it's a big difference.
Yeah. Now, the other issue that crops up, which fights against this, is having everybody do it would degrade the overall quality, and we don't want to do that, right? One of the reasons the military is good is because it's volunteer only. People are motivated to be there.
Mm-hmm.
If you have people that aren't motivated to be there, that are required to be there, it can actually be very dangerous. We saw that in the World Wars, and we saw it in Vietnam when they had to do drafting people, and the volunteers didn't want to hang out with the people who were drafted. They're like, dude, you're going to get me killed. What are you doing here?
Yeah.
So, it needs to be compartmentalized a little bit, and I think there's a way to do it.
But there are certain things that if you would learn them, your life would just get better, because you would be more like self-efficient, and you will be able to solve more things on your own, because you know how these basic tools works and stuff like that.
Even just basic tools, basic like outdoor shit, how to make a fire,
how to read a map,
how to find water, how to read a map,
how to turn it the right way. You know?
Yeah.
I was actually talking to someone like
simple shit.
Someone who is like 20 or 18 nowadays, and I explained them that before GPS, you actually had to open a map, find the right square, like see where the roads are. Like you have to actually know how to turn off your mind of everything else and just look at the problem and okay, I have to find a direction. Nowadays, if your Google map is rolling for 3 seconds and you cannot load it,
people are like, oh,
you are lost, but before that you were able to solve a lot of things. So I'm actually, on one hand, I don't really like when I see money wars, like that. You see, oh, this area is rich on this, rich on that. Okay, let's occupy them and let's create some reason why to do that. That's happening through entire human history. But on the other hand, like those type of situations are gonna teach you something. And if you are lucky enough to not get killed or being injured, which is probably even worse, because then you are like depending on other people, and it's just nightmare. And no one actually talks about it too. That's another thing I want to talk to you about. Like, if people get hurt, no one talks about them. Did you watch what happened with those 13 Marines in when you guys were running out of the Afghanistan? Like, no one talks about the wounded. No one. There's the 13 guys who are killed, but there's so many of them who are wounded, but no one cares because they told them, oh, but they volunteer. Yeah, they did, but wrong leadership put them into the very dangerous situations that could be prevented, and no one cares about that. That's crazy.
Yeah, and they get home and they still got to live their life now. But it's going to be pretty fucked now, because whatever plans they had, you can be pretty sure are going to be different.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Now, they have put programs in place in the military that have helped.
Mm-hmm.
I still, I don't know how much it really helps, because I haven't been like wounded. Mm-hmm. So I don't really know exactly how hard it would be, but
well, yeah, I
mean, they have Wounded Warrior now, which is supposed to help, and guys are usually, at least the guys you work with, still have your back, even years down the road. But yeah, it's not going to be easy for them. I think a lot of them would rather just die.
Yeah, well, yeah, of course, because if you are, let's say, young man and then you are depending on your parents to wipe your ass, then okay,
That shit sucks, dude.
yeah, man, like that's not a life, And people can tell, they can be like, oh, but you volunteer. Yeah, I did volunteer, but maybe you did everything right. You just did what you've been told to do, but it was wrong, let's say, leadership or your command or
or
whatever.
maybe literally everybody did the best job they possibly could.
Oh, yeah.
But since it's war,
Yeah.
you could still get
stuff
fucking...
happens,
Yeah.
So that's why, on the one hand, I really admire people who can go through that, but at the same time, I am like, I hope I will never have to go there. And I'm really like allergic to people who are really like war hungry, and it's always the people who would die first, and you know that even from jiu-jitsu, like as you progress and as you train more, you are more like calm because you are realizing like the possible dangers, and you don't do crazy stuff. You calculate everything that you do like before you actually do that, because man, if you break your knee, forget about walking for, let's say, 3 months and you are lucky.
Yeah.
Not being able to walk for 3 months and especially if you
Horrible.
do job that requires you to walk, the life is just bad. And people who never did anything like that and who don't even understand like something like this, that it can happen.
Like they're flailing around.
Yeah, they're just like, yeah, let's do that. Let's go. Let's just go there, kill everybody. I'm like, dude, stop. Like, stop. Think twice, So that is crazy. And that's another thing I really wanted to ask you, like how the combat zone feel like how different it is from like the civilian life, how different it is from jiu-jitsu fight, how different it is from like tournament, how like how does it feel?
It's different fundamentally, because there's a lead up. Like the closest thing you can compare is maybe a fight in jiu-jitsu, right? Because you're technically fighting for your life.
Yes, yeah.
Like you could, somebody could tap you out and have their way with you. So it's
They can
technically a
break
fight
your
for your
neck.
life.
You
Yeah.
go there with the intention of choking him out, breaking his limbs or whatever, you know?
Exactly. Now, deep down in my mind at least, because I started jiu-jitsu after, I know that people aren't trying to kill me.
Yeah,
so it's not the same.
You will not die, yeah.
Right? Whereas combat zone, as soon as you start getting shot at, it's different because you know it's survival mode now. It doesn't matter like what you've been taught before or even who's shooting at you. It's survival mode. So it feels weird. It's not going to feel like normal life here, and the time doesn't pass the same way when you're in a combat zone. And the other thing is we don't fight on our own turf, which also changes things a lot. And the turf we're fighting on is so different that it compounds it. So you go to a place like, obviously, it can be somewhat similar if we're in Erbil. But yeah, if you're in somewhere in Afghanistan, that is a different planet, essentially, for most Americans. So it already feels different, even if it wasn't a combat zone. It's 1,000 years in the past. So you have that.
Even compared to Iraq?
Maybe not. It's significantly worse than Iraq.
Oh my God.
Significantly. Yeah.
That is crazy.
Because there's just villages there that just modern technology doesn't exist out there. They're not in contact with the rest of the country. They're not in contact with anybody. They just have their village elder and a couple families, and they farm out there and they live there, and that's it. And that doesn't really exist in Iraq, not to the same scale. You have people that aren't educated and are more, self-sustaining, but they're not isolated like they are in the mountains in Afghanistan. So it's a completely different world. And then you add on that people trying to kill you. Yeah, it doesn't even feel like it's real. You might even get home and you'd be like, was I even really there? Like it all feels so fake. It's weird.
When you hear American politicians talking about the Iraq war and Iraq in general, and you have the perspective and you know how it looks like there, you saw the people, are they just out of their mind, or they have no perception of what's going on, right?
Yeah, absolutely they don't. I mean, they don't need to, in a sense, because no one's holding them accountable to. So we're kind of just letting them run the show, and they have a huge power trip. There's so many degrees separated from the reality of what actually happens on the ground in the war zones that they go to that
So they just talk.
They have no idea.
But it's
they want results. I think a lot of it is for money. At least it seems like it is. And then, yeah, I mean, I guess they just want to get reelected. They have no fucking clue what's going on over there.
Mm-hmm.
I have a feeling that even when they like authorize operations over there, they really don't know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
The letter of the law says they have to authorize it, but I think the commander knows what's going on, and he tells whatever politician, whatever suit,
Yeah.
and he's just like, no, okay.
He will just
do
create
whatever.
a story.
Yeah, they have no fucking idea. They're not really in control
Mm-hmm.
of what's over there, like
Mhm.
we are.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, you know, I never seen a combat. I never been shot at or anything like that. But at least I am not participating on this like, oh, we need another war, or we need to go to the war, or
We don't.
let's go to the war, or something crazy. Because I seen way too many people who seen this crazy stuff to be able to realize how crazy that shit is, you know. Last thing, speaking of money, how lucrative that is going in there.
Going into war, very, very lucrative. Mainly because we have a big industry behind it. So massive contracts get dealt out to all of the people who make weapons, people who make jets, etc. And on top of that, you're controlling a region now. If it has natural resources, you
It's yours.
by default have control of the natural resources. So oil in Iraq, that's not really a mystery. Rare earth minerals in Afghanistan, it's probably the largest deposit in the
Yeah.
world.
Yeah.
Nobody really wants to talk about that, but I wonder why we were there for 20 years and suddenly we need to make a lot of cell phones and
Yeah.
batteries, right?
Yeah, right.
It's the same everywhere, and the same thing with anything that's close to a shipping lane. If you control those areas, you can effectively control price of global trade. So it is all about money at the end of the day, because that's kind of what life has default
Yeah.
been about for developed societies. Since we just turned everything into monetary value,
Yes.
that's kind of where the bottom line ends up.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it can be pretty lucrative. It can also destroy someone's economy if they get it wrong.
Course. If they are deep in it and they cannot afford it.
Yeah, we're seeing that in current events right now. So
And how about the Marines or the soldiers who are there on the ground? Is it worth it for them to go there for money? Because that's the
Go there for
argument.
money.
People use it. You know, very often. They're like, "Oh, you go there for money." But I'm thinking like, how do you value your life when it comes to money? I can't make a number how much is my life value.
If you're there for money, you're there for the wrong reasons.
Mhm.
Now, granted, some people were there for money. Now, they didn't necessarily choose to deploy, but they chose to enlist because they were like, the military is going to pay for my degree, right?
Mhm.
School's expensive.
Mhm.
And in the process of them being ordered around for those 4 years, yeah, they go do a deployment and they do their best, but it's not the right place to be.
Because you
If you
can
need it
make a
for the
lot of
money.
money nowadays literally doing very basic thing. Like you can work in the restaurant and make thousands and thousands on tips.
Yeah,
But, like-
you need to be a little bit crazy to want to do it,
Uh-huh.
period. And there could be a myriad of reasons. You're crazy, you're curious, you just want a change of scenery, a million reasons
I think,
why
like-
somebody might go, but money really shouldn't be one of them.
I feel like military career offers people a second chance how to start living your life, right?
It absolutely is too. That's a big one.
You
So
can
if
be
you're
like,
not happy with the choices that you made, or you're just in a rut, you get a chance to start fresh. Nobody knows your name. Nobody cares.
nobody cares.
All they care about is results.
Performance.
And that's a very attractive thing to some people.
Mhm.
It was for me too. I was like, dude, I'm in my mid-20s. I haven't done shit. I kind of always wanted to do this, but I kind of didn't. And it's like, all right, nut up or shut up. Now you get to restart and see where it takes you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you just, keep going on those adventures
Mm-hmm.
and see what happens.
Yeah, that's a big one. I really think like that, especially in US, because there's so many people who are growing up without a dad, who are growing up without functioning family, without mom is drug addict. That's so common. People in my country, they don't even realize like how incredibly all common that is, that you are coming from pretty much environment that hates you as a kid. Everything that you go through is a freaking fight. School, way to school, your parents, your grandma is drug addict, your father is drug addict, and there's so many people like that, man. There's so many, especially in the cities like LA. Talk to anyone in downtown who is like on drugs, and there's like tens of thousands of people. everyone or 99% of the people are gonna tell you, oh, my entire family is drug addict. First time I had heroin, I was 8 years old, and crazy stuff like that. So I feel like a whole lot of people who will actually make it to adulthood, at least sober, from, let's say, fucked up environment, stuff like that, like military career can be, let's say, a way how they can reborn their self, you know, and how they can be actually successful.
Yeah, a lot of them can get out that way. Let's say they maybe not even a broken family or like fucked up with drugs, but maybe they're just real poor. Their family's always been poor.
Living in the middle of nowhere.
They get a chance. Okay, so maybe they're the one that breaks away from their family. They do have to do whatever the military tells them to do for 4 years, but at the end of that, they can get a degree, they can get a job and move up and basically drag their family out of poverty. That's a real attractive thing too. And that's just not, not even just in the States. Money has attracted people to the military for a long time because it's a stable job.
Do you guys have foreigners in there, or it's just all US citizens?
There's foreigners, but they're basically getting their citizenship through military service. So they do exist. It's not that common, but they do exist.
In the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, man. It was
thanks for having me.
Very
it was
interesting
awesome.
Conversation. Like, I feel like people need to hear more of that, you know, because I like to read about it, but there's one thing I like more, and that is talk to people who actually been there, you know, and pretty much all you guys are telling me the same story, you know. Politics is one thing, the real thing is different thing. The people out there are not all terrorists, as, you know, the media presented to us. They are just regular people who wants to live their life, and most often they are just the main victims of us and them, and I mean the other party that is involved in that. And
yeah, it's a crazy cacophony of chaos,
world,
man.
You know,
everything's gray.
What is your prediction in Iraq? In Afghanistan, we know it's lost. Chinese are taking it as their territory nowadays.
Man, it's hard to say. Back in the day, I would have told you that I thought maybe Kurdistan might eventually become a country.
Oh yeah,
but I don't know about now, because support for them has waned a lot from the West in recent years since we left, and Turkey hasn't really backed down their stance at all.
Well, Turkey hates them.
Yeah, they've always remained resolute that they're not going to have it
Turkey hates them, man.
In their border. Iran is the same way. Iraq was really the only place that was making progress, and Iraq as a country still recognized that it's an autonomous region, but it's so unstable. It's kind of held up by a house of cards almost, and all it's really going to take is one thing to go wrong, to plunge economies down, or to make something a little bit more stable, to throw it all away again. So they were really kind of on life support with us, and I don't know if they're going to have their own country in my lifetime now. I'm just not sure, because I probably would have told you they would when I was over there, because things were growing, the cities were getting nicer, they were recovering from all the war, which you hadn't seen that in who knows how freaking long, and they had just been ravaged by ISIS. But
do you think
impossible for me to predict, man.
I think I know the answer already, but I'm still gonna ask, do you think like more unstable US is politically inside of its own country, like as it is right now, that people are just pissed on every level, more actually that is gonna also show up in that region as well, that everything is gonna be more unstable when US has a lot of domestic problems?
Yeah, when even historically it's easy to see when we have a lot of domestic problems, we tend to splinter what we want to do overseas, right? So that, because shots start to get thrown here domestically, and then politicians are like, okay, I got to start taking a side here, so we're gonna have to start, they start being aligned on less and less things, and that includes foreign policy, that includes things like supporting the Kurds, and if this kind of stuff doesn't have full support over there, it doesn't happen. You start to see it fall apart. So yeah, I'd say the less stable our internal stuff is, the less stable anywhere is that we're holding up.
Yeah.
In a region like this, this is like a place that we're holding up. So
what's your take on the Afghanistan withdrawal?
Sucks. But I could tell you that it was probably inevitable.
Really?
Now, could it have been handled better? Yeah. Could have been handled many, many years ago a lot better by us just leaving when we were supposed to. After the first 6 months maybe we were there back in, I was young, 2000, 2001. I mean, we pretty much had him backed into the corner in the south, right? We thought we knew Osama bin Laden was there. For whatever reason, we didn't finish that. and it turned into decades of pretty pointless conflict and a lot of people not really knowing what we were there to do. And of course, eventually we left because we got bored.
Mm-hmm.
Now, did we stay there for 20 years to just get like lithium out of the mines? I don't know. That's going to sound pretty tinfoil hat, but
No, I don't think so, man.
I mean, I think it just sucks.
Mm-hmm.
It sucks because lots of guys, the good people over there thought we were going to have their back, and we don't. And so now it's kind of plunging into the dark ages. There were guys that put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears on our side into making it better and winning fights that they basically have nothing to show for it now.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like the Vietnam guys did.
Yeah.
Although you can whine about being an aggressor and having aggressor problems too.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the most optimistic view I can have is that there's a generation of kids that grew up when we were there
Oh, yeah.
with some stability, and they've seen it tank with the Taliban, and they realize that it can be better.
Yeah.
And they're going to demand it eventually.
Well,
I hope.
you know, my thing was like, okay, imagine you are born, let's say in 2001, right? And all you know is just living under US influence. And now they are just gone and you don't know anything. And there's right now some other dudes and they are telling you how to live. And you are like 20.
Yeah.
And
they're
you
gonna
were
be
just
like,
going to
"Fuck
Starbucks
this."
every day. And you were like, what?
Yeah, especially the women out there.
Oh, yeah.
They're just going to get abused and they're going to be like, fuck this. This was so much better just a few years ago before you guys showed up.
It's crazy. It's
So,
crazy. I just can't believe
I'm trying
that,
to be optimistic.
Yeah, I just can't believe that
But-
they get out of there the way they did, leaving all that material out there. And not only that, but leaving all those like precious bases that are like Bagram, you know, they just like get out of there. And I was talking to people who even serve on that base and they're like, it's like a fortress. There's no
It
way.
was massive.
If you
massive,
control
massive. Big city.
Yeah, they're like, if you control Bagram, you control the entire Afghanistan because you can go anywhere from there. If there is a problem in some region, okay, that's fine. You are able to solve it. Now, we cannot solve anything. So that's what makes it even more like nonsense thing, you know, that you like give up your only one operation point, you know, and
Yeah.
just get out of the entire country, you know. But
Yeah,
this
it's-
thing is like, I feel like it's too early to speculate. I feel like we don't have the full picture, and I think like the future years are gonna like answer us of like what really was going on.
We'll
up
see.
there, you know.
The next player over there will be China. It'll be them talking to the Taliban. If they can make progress and turn that into a country that isn't in the dark ages, good for them, I guess.
Mhm.
They did what we couldn't do and what the Soviets couldn't do. But for now, I'm not very optimistic. I think the Taliban are just going to abuse the Chinese for infrastructure projects, just like they did us. They'll play nice until they don't want to play nice because they're just incapable of playing nice, and then we'll have this whole thing repeat.
Damn, man, it's
But there'll be
crazy.
red stars out there
That's
instead of red, white, and blue.
It's never ending wars. Thank you very much. It was very educational and
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
perfect. Thank you.